Good afternoon. All right, and welcome back from lunch. I hope all of you who did not eat the delicious lunch that was provided got to find something that was equally delicious. It was an awesome opportunity and for some good networking. I had great conversation, and it sounded like everybody around me was doing the same. For this afternoon, we're going to kick off with an incredible conversation. We have a great guest here. General Poole will be speaking, but before that, I wanted to introduce a gentleman by the name of Steve White. Steve is the director at KPMG, bringing over 29 years of dedicated service in the Marine Corps to his role. Following his retirement from the military, he joined KPMG, leveraging his extensive knowledge in the DoD's planning, programming, budgeting, and execution process. As the former Marine Corps Program Objective Memorandum Development Branch Head, Steve managed the development and defense of the Marine Corps Program Objective Memorandum, demonstrating exceptional leadership and organizational skills. And he is here today to kick off this afternoon's session. Ladies and gentlemen, give me a round of applause for Mr. Steve White.
So I get the opportunity to introduce my friend General Poole. And you're wondering like why I get up here, just look around your collar. My boss decided we'd sponsor, and this is what you get. But honestly, it's great to be here amongst some of my logistics friends. And to Tom Keating, I did not cut the budget of logistics. It's a theme going around. It's not true. But let's get to the real person here. It's just the Assistant Deputy Commandant for Installation and Logistics Division, Brigadier General Forrest Poole. He's commanded at the fleet from the platoon to the group level. As a staff officer, he spent 2 tours in Iraq as a battalion operations officer. He was a member of the Joint Staff J4 and also the executive assistant for the Deputy Commandant of INL. A graduate of the Citadel, which is a small community college down in South Carolina. He also holds degrees from the School of Advanced Warfighting and the National War College. He is not only a proud husband, father, but unfortunately, a University of Georgia football fan. My friend, Forrest Poole.
Thanks, Steve. All right. Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and certainly appreciate you taking the time to support this worthwhile endeavor with the Association of Marine Corps Logisticians has gone to the trouble to put on. Really appreciate it. Glad to see how this event is growing. And not only including, of course, uniform partners as well, of course, Marines, but our joint partners as well, our coalition partners, and as was mentioned before a couple times in the last panel, our industry partners as well. Probably talk about each one of those groups in my comments here, and hopefully more importantly in our discussion. So thanks a lot for being here. Thanks for Christopher Newport University for hosting. What a tremendous setting. As Kirk and I were talking about, it's just far enough from the Pentagon so you can drive down. You don't have to bring everything with you, but you can still get back. And so really appreciate that. I think it's a great idea. And you know how it is. I don't know if you're doing surveys or anything, but you do a survey, and everybody's got a brilliant idea for where it should be and better locations and all that until it comes to execution, right? And then everybody complains about wherever we go. But to get together and have a dialogue like this is worth the price of admission. And I know that a lot of you have put a lot of time, energy, and effort and money into these kinds of forums. And I hope that not only meeting people that you haven't met before, but maybe some conversations that you haven't had, or maybe just some things you haven't thought about. I don't know, maybe you have, but maybe just think about them in a different way. Right. And so, I hope that if nothing else, some of the comments that I make will help you think about that. And if you disagree, that's good. And if you violently disagree, that's even better. Right. So I want you to consider it. Right. No one has. There's not one answer. There's multiple answers made up of multiple folks coming together to formulate the answer and to figure out the path forward. Certainly in the logistical realm. And I'll talk more about the context of that. I hope you don't mind if I move around a little bit. I apologize. I would be down on the floor there, but then some people wouldn't be able to see me, so I'll just stand up here. And I don't mean to, be like the Lord of the Rings, up here or anything. So I apologize for that, but I don't want to be tethered to the podium either. All right. But thanks again for being out here. And what I just ask you to think about, well, first off, on behalf of Lieutenant General Ted Banta, DCINL, my boss, who's just retired after 37 years of honorable and faithful service, just tremendous. It's an honor to be here on his behalf to be able to talk to this group and take some things back, of course, that I can get on as we get ready for the transition to a new DCINL. Lieutenant General Steve Skolenka is coming from the DCOM of Indo-PACOM, so really looking forward to Lieutenant General Skolenka joining the team, coming back to headquarters Marine Corps, and just the vision and things that he's going to bring into it to continue what General Banto is working, and then certainly having a perspective from being out there in the Indo-Pacific will really inform a lot of the things that we're going to do going forward. And it was mentioned at the panel a few minutes ago, I think Joe Garreau had said it or something, right? I mean, there's a big bad world out there, right? Indo-PACOM is one part of it. There's the rest of the globe to consider as well. And you know, as Commandant Berger and Commandant Smith have said, right? We're not a single unit force, right? We don't have one way to be implemented. We're a globally deployable force that can execute multiple missions on multiple domains at the same time, right? If it happens to be a focus on the Indo-Pacific, so be it. If it happens to be in the Europe or South or Africa or wherever it is, it's the same thing. And our Marines and sailors and civilians are trained and can execute those missions, you know, multiple areas. So, you know, it's not a focus on the Pacific, right? It's just like having priorities, right? As leaders and decision makers, right? One of our most important things that we do is come up with priorities. So the folks who we have the pleasure to serve with understand, hey, here's if you know, commander's intent. If all things else fail, here's what I need to do to help out in the mission. I'm going to do this thing. And I think priorities kind of fall in line with that, right? It doesn't mean that other things aren't going to happen. It doesn't mean that, you know, when I say, hey, here's the different things you want to get after an LP, that just because audit sustainment is fifth on the list or whatever, doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means that, hey, here's the priority of things that I want you to think about. And the things that you're doing, how do they tie back to that? And if they don't, I owe it to them as a leader to say, you know, is your time being well spent? Is there something else that you could be doing, right? Because, you know, that's our most valuable commodity is our time, right? We can't get any of that back. So what I ask you to do, long introduction, what I ask you to think about is if you could think 74 years ago, August the 4th, 1950, right? The Pusan perimeter was established, all right? On June 25th, 1950, the Korean War kicked off when the North Koreans, People's Republic of North Korea crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea. 25 June 1950. Didn't hear a lot about it, did you? Right? The importance of the Korean War can't be overemphasized, right? One, where it happened. Two, who it happened to. Three, the incredible sacrifices that had occurred. A lot of people forget, not in this room, of course, but elsewhere, 54,000 Americans died in the Korean War in 3 years. 54,000 Americans. Think about that. Are we prepared for that? Are we prepared for those kinds of casualties that we haven't seen? And everybody likes to say World War II. I'll bring it a little bit closer to Korean War or to Vietnam, right? So think about that. So I would ask you to think about where are you in your headspace as to what period of time are we in as logisticians, right? Are we in the interwar period that we like to talk about between World War I and World War II, right? That period that started from 1918, 1919 at the end of World War I. Depends on when you say World War II started, but we'll say for the United States, 1941. Do you think we're in that period, right? And if you are, that's fine. But what kind of things are you doing to get after it? I don't know if you had an opportunity to read Freedom's Forge by Arthur Herman, but if you get a chance to look at the book, take a look at it, because what you'll get appreciation for is all the things that occurred in 1939 and 1940 before 7 December 1941 that got America on a wartime footing to be able to do the things that we did, the country did, when the war actually started. Right? Now, a lot of things we hear, not in this room, of course, but elsewhere, about, well, you know, today we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough people, industry this, industry that, all the same things that they dealt with leading up to World War II, right? It didn't happen overnight. The American industry wasn't prepared, and I would say in some cases willing to go to a wartime footing, right? Because business is business, to be in business, to make money, to employ people, right? To carry on a legacy, right? Those are all good things. Those are all things that we want, right? So what are we doing now as we think through that from your service perspective, from your national perspective, right? Or from your industry perspective? So what are you doing right now to communicate those things, right? And if you get it, but your teammate to your left and right doesn't get it, well, then you need to help them understand and communicate in a way that makes sense to them so they can make that transition. So I'd ask you to think about that right now. Where do you think we are? I love the theme here about competition, crisis, and conflict. For me, I think in the logistical world, we're already in crisis, right? We're already in crisis, right? Because we do competition every day, right? And I don't know how many war games y'all have been to, a lot, right? A lot of war games, right? Hey, man, I don't need freaking ships at the bottom of the ocean to tell me we're in conflict in logistics, right? Because just getting there is conflict, right? Who tried to get home 2 Fridays ago, right? Right, now think about that. Our first excuse is, well, you know, that's an IT problem. Oh, okay, yeah, okay, I hear you. It's an IT problem. But, you know, when the ships don't arrive on time and the planes don't arrive on time, we quit looking at the IT people and we start looking at the logisticians, don't we? Right? So what kind of things are we doing to have resilient data, to have assured data, as Colonel Smith said earlier? What kinds of things are we doing to make sure that the data is going to be there, that the infrastructure, the architecture is going to be there, so that when the CrowdStrike or the next patch or whatever it is, a kinetic attack in cyberspace occurs, so that when they turn and look to us, we're not like, well, I don't know how you're going to get to the war game. You know, good luck, right? Because that ain't going to work, right? So how do we do that? How do you think through that? What kind of things are you doing now to make sure we have assured data? How are you assuring and securing your data now? And if you're not, it's already being exploited and vulnerable. It's vulnerable, right? And so what I would just ask you to think about is, if we don't have assured data, if we can't operate in assured data space, then we need to get out of data and go to analog, right? We need to go back to yellow ledgers and pencils and, you know, and start writing things down in logbooks like the green one I got up here. Right? Because what's the alternative? That's the only alternative, because if I can't trust the data, if it's not assured, if I don't know that the information that I can trust that I'm sending to our partners at Transcom, I'm receiving from our partners at Mar4PAC, wherever it is, if I can't trust that data, what in the heck are we going to do? Right? That's where we are now, in my opinion. That's the crisis. Right? And we're not running around with scissors. We're not afraid. We're not staying up at night. We don't think we don't have a plan, because we do have a plan. I would just ask you in your silo, whatever you're doing, I say silo intentionally, whatever you're doing, how are you making it better? How are you communicating that to other people so they understand the threats that you're facing or the vulnerabilities that you think you're facing? The key thing I would like you to take away from the next few minutes that I have the opportunity to spend with you, and I'm very grateful for it, is we got to think differently. Right? We've got to think, like, no kidding, like, think differently, like, to make yourself uncomfortable, think differently. To make yourself think differently about everything that you've done for the great heroic war, all the ribbons and medals and things that you're wearing, and your Marines and sailors and soldiers and airmen, everybody who sacrificed for the past 20 years, think about that, and it might not work going forward. Right? Now, that doesn't take away from anything that was done in the past, but I'm just saying that if we hold too hard onto that, we're not ready for this next fight. And I would say there's a little bit of tendency in the military, I just know the Marine Corps specifically, a little bit conservative, hold on to things, right? Very difficult to think through change. Very difficult, right? And what we don't want is, we don't want casualties coming across, you know, from the Indo-Pacific, just take that for instance, and say, oh gosh, I wish I would have thought it differently before, right? So how are we doing that now? How are you doing that, right? And if you're not doing it, then you're doing your Marines and your sailors and your civilians a disservice. And if you're not having those difficult discussions right now, then you need to start having them when you leave here, right? Because your boss and your boss's boss need to understand, and your subordinates, those who are working for you, need to understand that. Because together we can get after it, right? But if we just think, hey, what we did before worked, hey man, it's not going to work in the next battle space. I would argue it's not working now, right? We've all been there. We've all been to the colleges. We've all studied it, right? You want to win the next fight without having to fight. One adversary thinks they've already won in our space, right? I would contest that. I would say, no, you haven't won, right? You haven't won, because we're going to contest it. And we understand where we are here. It's not just competition, it's crisis. And I also say it's easy to think about this in my head. It's easy to think about this because when we think about kinetics, right? We're not in crisis. We're not trading, we're not shooting missiles at each other yet, right? But in the logistics space, what's the equivalent of that? And how's that happening? What are we doing to make sure we're prepared for the next round and the next round and the next round? And if we're not doing it, then the enemy is stealing the march on it, stealing the march on us. One of the things we're trying to do at INL and LP to think differently is we've had some great leadership from the commandants. It started with General Berger, Commandant Berger in 2019 with Forrest Design, where he said, hey, we need to think differently, right? We're gonna divest of some legacy platforms that we have, like tanks, for instance, right? Because are we gonna use those in an Indo-Pacific theater scenario, for instance, right? So you can imagine the shock that happened when we got rid of tanks. A lot of gnashing of teeth, a lot of wailing, but they're gone, right? So now we have to come up with other platforms and capabilities. Commandant Smith, General Smith is doing the same thing and saying, okay, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna extend our operational reach? How are we gonna make sure we have the firepower that we need, that we have the assured comms that we need, right? So where I'm going with this is when we talk about contested logistics, right? Big topic. I'm so glad it gets talked about a lot. But don't forget, logistics is just another warfighting function, right? Right? It's just another warfighting function. So command and control, fires, maneuver, force protection, right? Another warfighting function. And the reason I harp on that every opportunity I get is because I don't want logistics to be just our problem, right? It's not our problem. It's a commander's problem, just like and a staff's problem, just like every other warfighting function. So think about that. When you hear contested logistics, think, okay, here's my role in it, and how am I communicating that to my commander so he or she can make an informed decision? A couple of things that we're working on at INL-LP. One is we developed a campaign plan, right? And the idea of the campaign plan was not just to have a bunch of tasks and things we need to execute and put on a spreadsheet and turn from, red to yellow to green and forget about it, right? But actually lay out some ideas, some lines of effort and some lines of operation to say, hey, here's the things that we want to get after over time, right? And headquarters is POM cycles, right? To get after over time. The most important one, in my opinion, is log data and information technology, IT, all right? Because once again, if we don't have that assured IT, if we don't have that assured data, what do we have? How else are we communicating? How else are we communicating, right? We're not. I'm not sending something to Transcom. I mean, I'm going to send a yellow canary. Okay, well, what's their radio freak? What freak are they on, right? So we've got to think through that. Right? So what's our resilient comms? We can talk to Transcoms when they say, hey, we're going to support the CIF. Kathy mentioned it earlier. We're going to support the CIF. Okay, well, we got to make sure if things have changed, they understand that, right? So what we're trying to do in LP is talk about global logistics awareness and decision-making, right? So how we inform decision-making with global logistics awareness. And it could be from the tactical level to, having something on the ground at the most basic level where, they can use a platform that says, hey, I can see what's on the battle space and how I can tap into that. Or it could be up to the headquarters level. So, Joint Chiefs of Staff or someone, Headquarters Marine Corps could look at it, okay? Now that's very broad. I understand it's rife with challenges. I get it. It's a boil the ocean problem. Right? But if we think about it in those terms, and how can we improve that decision-making ability, now we're getting somewhere, right? And so one of the things that I need to think differently about is not thinking about the tactical fight. Yes, I want to support those who are on the forward edge of the battle. I get that, right? But there's commanders, there's people who do that, right? And as Marines, that's what we're trained to do from day one. But if I'm not looking at the operational and strategic picture and talking with my friends at OSD, Don CIO, NAV SUP, whoever it might be, then it doesn't matter. They don't need extra help down here at this fight, right? What they need is this help up here at this fight, right? Across the POMs. Think about 3 POMs, right? This 15 years. What kind of things can we do in 15 years? We can do a lot. We can do a lot of good things in 15 years. Now, we got to assume some risk, but think about that, all right? So think different. That's one of the things we're doing. Another thing we're trying to do is what we call portfolio rationalization. So we're looking across roughly 50 logistics IT systems, and we're trying to figure out, okay, of those 50, how many do we know kitting need, right? Based on a rationalization of how much usage do we have, what information does it provide, how much does it cost to maintain them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Now, there's going to be some happy people and unhappy people, but I'm not in the happy and unhappy business, right? But we're just going to need to figure out, hey, we'll keep this one, or we're going to replace it with that one, right? And when we do that, what's going to be the implication, right, across the chain? So portfolio rationalization is really something we're getting after, right? All to support force design and O-plan development. Next thing will be integrated force sustainment. It's great to hear Honorable Lohman. I've heard him multiple times. The regional support framework is spot on. The Marine Corps' Global Position Network, GPN, nests perfectly in that. I'm glad to see our Australian partner here as well because we talk about these things, right? Now, are there some challenges associated with it? Of course there are, right? But it's another way of thinking about it, right? Does everything need to come back to CONUS to be fixed? Does it need to come back to, to Kirk over there at Albany to be fixed? Not maybe in some cases, but not everything. Like, what other options do we have? I think that's what it's really doing for us. I think that was mentioned at the panel earlier today. It gives us some other options, right? The next thing I'm looking at is, for years and years and years in the Marine Corps, I'm sorry, this is kind of Marine Corps inside baseball, we talk about naval NLI, Naval Logistics Integration, NLI, right? So for years and years and years, we've talked about it. I'm trying to change it a little bit and make it Naval Integration Logistics, right? Naval integration first and foremost, because we have to do that with other things, fire, command and control, other warfighting functions, right? and then logistics. Because NLI hasn't gotten us where I think it needs to get us. There's been a lot of great effort in that, but I think if we think about it differently, what I'm trying to do, assuming a little bit of risk there, but I'm trying to do that. And finally, the last thing, just my priorities is we need to sustain the audit. Right, just thanks to the heroic work for years and years and years in the Marine Corps, we've been able to get an unmodified audit opinion, and now we need to sustain it. And it's taken just as much work to sustain it, but at some point we'll get it a plane where we can just keep on running. And I mean this in the best way. Right, there's a lot of great work going on, but what we want is kind of that audit work, the things that an auditor, an IPA looks at, an independent public accountant looks at, is just, I mean, backroom in the best way. Like, that's the way we do business. And for the Marines, right, FASMO, right? So when FASMO comes in, you understand what they're going to do. Well, let's update some of the things they're looking at. We're not going to change it. We're not going to have the commanders assume more risk. But if we add some audit language into the checklist, if we educate commanders on what it means to be auditable, right? That's what we owe. That's what we owe the force, and that's kind of what we're working on, right? It's not a whole new different way of doing business because we're being audited or auditable, right? Okay. All right. So that's a long introduction. I threw a lot there at you. I want to see if there's any questions. I'll take a pause here and I can keep on going. But I just want to see if there's any questions. I talk more about industry. I haven't hit on that too much yet, but I can talk about that more. So just want to pause for a second for questions. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. Brad Boynott, product manager for GCSS Marine Corps.
All right, Brad.
Not sure if I'm happy or unhappy yet. Find that out. My question to you, sir, is GLADM advertised at your level and across Congress to protect the funds if we use that in any of our reclamas or write-ups?
Yeah. I think it provides an opportunity to do that, Brad. I think that what I'm trying to do with GLADM, what we're trying to do with GLADM, right, is really tie it into. Let me back up. What I don't think we can have on today's battlefield and the fight of tomorrow, right, is we can't have two different systems. Everybody's going to say, yeah, right? The days of having Commandant 1, right, when all the cool stuff is going on, all the fire support coordinations going on that, the 6 actuals are getting on that net, and then we got, Commandant 2, and we're talking about how much toilet paper we need, right? Those days are gone, right? I mean, we're talking about data transmissions in nanoseconds, right, from austere environments in the Pacific or in Europe, wherever it might be, Africa, wherever it might be around the world. Right, Brad? So the idea is, and I didn't mention this, so thanks for asking that, is GLADM, right, is not a thing. It's a system of things, but those things, GCS Marine Corps is one of them, must tie into the CJAD C2 construct. I know everybody's got different ideas about CJAD C2. Whatever your idea is, that's great. All I'm saying is that if there's a system that the war fighters are using, air quotes, if this is being recorded or something, right, are using, that we have to be on that same system. Right? So GLADM is going to provide that same picture that you're going to have for fire support coordination, you're going to have for airspace coordination, for whatever it might be. Does that make sense? Right? But if it doesn't do that, if we advertise logistics systems as something else, then it becomes something else, and it automatically becomes second place. Right? So one of the challenges for us is how do we tie that in a meaningful, realistic way, right? So that it gets funding and resourced, and sometimes we got to help ourselves, right? Like there's going to be some cuts that I talked about with those systems because I'm not going to take that money and go buy new Coraframs, right? I'm going to take that money and put it into developing these systems, right? It might be another system, right? Because I can't keep going to P&R and, Steve White, he worked at P&R and great friends over there now, right? Their first answer is, how have you helped yourself? That's a fair question, right? But if we have our budget and don't try to say, well, hey, here's how we can move some money around, I'm not going to move money around. Well, then I guess it's not that important, right? I mean, that would be a fair comeback, even though we don't like it. Right? So the bottom line is, whatever we do in GLADM, to be able to make sure people understand how it fits in, it must be a part of that CJAD C2 construct, otherwise it's not going to matter. All right? Thanks for that question. Anything else, sir? Great. Oh, hey, Kirk.
Just following up on the money question, because you said that you talked about thinking differently, and I think in this particular audience, you'd get a lot of amens on that, bought in. That's part of a lot of why some of these folks are here. Very willing to think differently, do things differently. At the enterprise level, how can we sort of enable that different thinking when the mechanism to implement new things, which generally comes down to money in many cases, the mechanism to do that hasn't really fundamentally, some may argue with me on this, on whether it's fundamentally changed or not, but the ability to get money to do things that are different really hasn't changed. That particular process remains sort of status quo and generally kind of gets us down to almost a zero base. You get only what you need and no more, which allows very little flexibility to experiment. So how do we think differently under those rules?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I hope you got a chance to see a few days ago where we're looking at PBBE process. And the new, there was a panel that came out and said, hey, we've got to modify this. We've got to come up with a new framework. And I think a lot of people, like you said, Kirk, say amen to that, right? Right. But I mean, the system PBBE has worked for years. So if we're going to replace it with something else, we got to make sure it works as well, right? And despite the challenges that we see with it, right, and the challenges that it might cause, right? I would say the first thing, and so one of my branch heads or somebody comes to me, right? What I try to explain to people is if we start from a position of scarcity, right? If we only think that if I try something new, I'm going to lose something, you're never going to gain something, right? And these aren't just words. Like this is what I'm putting into action at LP to make difficult decisions, right? So we've got to talk about risk. It's all about risk mitigation, right? If you start from a position of a scarcity, you won't get there. But if you start from a position of abundance, right? Now you're thinking a little bit differently, right? And so way it might play out maybe in your organization, I don't know, is, hey, we can pay for these 10 systems, right? Okay, well, how important are those 10 systems? Tell me why that system's important to you, right? Now, when you ask me that question, the first thing it becomes, I think somebody said it earlier, it becomes emotional, right? It's my problem, it's my program, right? It's mine this, it's my that. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's the taxpayers, it's the Marine Corps, it's the enterprise, it's whatever it is. Right? So how do we think differently? How do we personally think differently about it, Kurt? Right? And so then we say, okay, and this is what I've got some great branch heads who are working hard on this for me. And so almost every problem they bring to me, I say, oh, that's great. What did the other 5 branch heads say? Right? And it's taken a few minutes, but now they understand it. Oh yeah, everybody, I better ask these other folks, or Forrest is not going to want to hear what they have to say. Right? Because what I want people to understand is it's trade-offs in the resources that we have. We have enough money to do whatever in the heck we want to do. Right? We just have to decide what are we going to do and what we're not going to do. And back to our portfolio rationalization, are we just going to keep programs because we've had them, or are we going to keep programs because we need them? 2 different things. It's a different question. Right? We keep a program because we want it or because we need it. Right? And then how do you justify that? And I think that's fair. Right? And I think you have to have an informed adult decision and tee that up to the decision makers. I think another thing that inhibits our thinking differently about it, Kirk, is we think, well, what if we don't win? Right? What if I go to all this work and I tee it up to this boss and to that boss and to that boss and nothing changes? I just wasted time. Did you? Right? Did you? I don't think so. Did you inform the discussion? Did you bring rational, reasonable arguments to discussion so that your boss's boss or whomever it might be can look at the problem a little bit differently? They might make the same decision. It doesn't mean that your argument wasn't valid, right? So that's what we're trying to work on. And where do you have flexibility within your budget? Everybody has flexibility. We're just reticent to use it, right? Because sometimes we don't take the time to make sure we understand the implications of doing so, right? Are you risk-seeking? Are you risk-averse? Individually, you need to figure that out, right? Are you seeking risk, or are you averse to risk, right? And does that change over time, right? And does it depend on where you stand, depends on where you sit, right? So think about that. So I think you can. I think there's opportunities there. I think if we go in there and say, well, this is what we've had for the past 5 palms, and therefore it shall not change, well, then they don't need me, right? And get a monkey and give him a bunch of bananas, and he can sign the paperwork, right? Right? But they need me, and my boss expects me to be able to say, hey, sir, hey, ma'am, here's some opportunities. Now, there's some risk involved, but we've talked to the stakeholders about it, and here's what we think we can make something happen. Or we'll just keep doing what we've been doing, right? Thanks for that. I hope that answers your question. But it's a long answer, right, because there's a lot going on in there. Once again, we got to start from a position of abundance and not scarcity. Heck, there's a lot of people who would like to have a $700 billion budget, right? A lot of people, right? Marine Corps is a Fortune 100 company, right? It is, So anyway, hope that answers your question. Next, anything else? Next one. All right. Okay. I think another thing I would ask you to think about is, how we connect things across, and we'll just speak specifically about logistics here, right? How we connect things, right? And if you had the opportunity to serve, a joint staff or OSD, outside of your service, or at the service headquarters level, right? I mean, it's tremendous to be able to see how other organizations function at that higher level. And it's, I say I like to be in the Pentagon, and I honestly mean that, right? The things that happen there are astounding based on just the superhuman work that people do and the great energy they bring to it every day and solving some wicked problems, right? But I would just ask you to think about, how do you coordinate those problems that you're working on, right? And I think what I've done throughout my career for many, many years is just look at it from my silo. I said a silo a minute ago, and I meant that intentionally. I just look at it from my perspective and say, well, I don't ask this question, but I think, well, how's this going to make me feel? Who cares how it makes you feel, right? Is it going to create the effect that you need, right? And then you think about the effect, and then you can talk to a partner. You can talk to somebody, across the hallway. You can talk to somebody at another branch and say, hey, here's the effect that we want to generate. Whatever it is, we want to seize meth objective alpha, whatever it is, right? We want to create this effect. What do you think about it? If you start the discussion there, it's a lot better than saying, hey, I'm going to take this, or I think we ought to get rid of that, or why do you keep wasting time, energy, and money on that? I would ask you to think that way, right? What effect are you trying to generate? Now, how do you create that synergy of that effect, among a coalition? And I say coalition intentionally as well, right? Because all so often what we'll do is we'll think of an idea, we'll get a task, right? And we'll just start farming it out to the same people that we always do. What I would challenge you to do, I'd ask you to do is, when you get something like that and you're thinking about it, shoot it to somebody who's adjacent who might disagree with you. See what they say, right? Send it to a coalition partner, right? Send it to a joint partner, right, who might not have anything to do with it. I think one of the things we're missing an opportunity on, especially in the logistics realm, is there's so much good stuff going on across the services, but we don't know about it because we can't figure out we're waiting for a mechanism to bring it together. Well, the mechanism's us. The mechanism is innumerable, right? The mechanism is tens of thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Right? And what we need is that organic connection with all of us to reach across and say, hey, my counterpart in the Air Force, hey, I'm working on this. Hey, Space Force, how are you thinking about this problem? Right? Yeah, I know I'm a Marine and we don't do a whole lot in space yet, but how are you thinking about this? Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, here's what we're thinking about. Maybe they'll respond, maybe they won't. I don't know. What the hell did it just cost you? An email? They're free last time I checked, right? Right? So if you think about that, so how are we coordinating that? And there's an interesting book I would ask you to take a look at if, in your spare time, called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And Lieutenant General Mike Dana, U.S. Marine Corps retired, recommended the book, right? It's essentially about how open source data coding has come about and the goodness of that. Okay, I'm not here to argue that, right? I don't know. I don't understand that. All I understand is it got me to think about how we coordinate things better. Right? Well, first off, there's either it's 0 or 1. Either you coordinated or you didn't. Right? So how you can coordinate things better, right? And if you think about a cathedral and the architecture, right? There's one person in charge, and he or she is saying, yes, put that stone there, and then everybody puts the stone there. With a bazaar, it's like there's all bazaar, as in bazaar where things are being sold, not bizarre as in weird, right? There's things going on. It just somehow it happens. Transactions occur, prices are set, people aren't ripped off. If they are, there's justice, right? Those kinds of things happen. My point of that is drawing this out is to say, right, in the bazaar, we're able to bring a lot more things together, but it takes risk, right? You're assuming a little bit of risk because, I got to give something up because he might think I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, maybe you don't, but maybe he does. But you won't know that if you don't talk to him or her, right? So I'd ask you to think about that. So what kind of things can you do to reach across and to seek input from other people who may or may not have some input for you that you can consider? Maybe you didn't consider. You probably didn't. Or maybe you did. You just put it in a different way, right? And they might not have any skin in the game. That's fine. They might come to it from a completely new perspective. That's even better, right? Or they might have some scar tissue and say, hey, I hear what you're I understand what effect you're trying to generate. I tried to do the same thing. I would phrase it this way, knowing what I know now. And then you're like, oh, wow, that's pretty good, man. I'll use that, right? And then you use it. Okay. So I'd ask you to think about that. Cathedral and the Bazaar, just an idea about how we coordinate or don't coordinate things. As I start to wrap up here, any questions on that? As I start to wrap up, I want to circle back on industry, right? And, as I started with industry and the things that were done, the American industry leading up to World War I to the beginning stages of World War I for the United States, right? If that's where we are now, right, I would ask us in uniform, how are we communicating those requirements to industry? I think that's what they need to know. How do we do that, right? Now, one thing I would offer is, and those of you, and Kevin Samples mentioned earlier, he spent 37 years of honorable and faithful service in the Air Force. He has a little bit different background. Maybe he did some other things, but as for me, like no one's ever, and it's, I need to go find it, but no one's ever talked to me or taught me how to interact with industry, right? There's the don't do this and don't do that and don't do this and don't do that, right? But it's like, no kidding, how do you interact? And so generally what I've done is defer to my acquisition professionals, right? But the acquisition professionals, God love them, I know they're in the room as well, you do great stuff, but you don't look at it from exactly the same lens as I do. I don't need you to look from, but I need to help inform that, right? And you can inform, what you're looking at. And I think in the Marine Corps, what I've seen is that for a long time, we just beat our acquisition professionals about the head and shoulders and said, get the gear out to the forces. Why haven't you done that yet? There's Marines in harm's way. Why aren't you doing that, right? And in not wanting to get in the way of that, we just gave every bit of that to the acquisition community. I'm not defending the acquisition. I don't know. I've just learned a little bit about it in the past 2 years. But we have to come alongside the acquisition professionals. We have to take the time to say, hey, man, I understand what you're doing. Here's how we can make this better together. And if they tell you to beat it, they tell you to beat it. Then figure out a new way to go. But I think that correlates directly to industry, right? Like I'm saying is that, I think Kevin said it, all of us are going to retire at some point. Well, for a lot of us, it's the only job we've ever had. So I don't understand pay scales. I don't understand, and I know you get all that from TRS or whatnot. But my point is, how do you interact with ministry in a meaningful way and not think, keeping my card so close to my chest that is not beneficial for anybody, right? So that's something I think we need to think about a little bit more. And how can we educate each other in a free space? Maybe, I don't know, but I think there'd be some value there so that it could be more productive for everybody, right? Because it's all about requirements, determination, and requirements fulfillment, right? To create that effect, right? All right. Does that make sense? Any pushback on that from industry? Anybody got any better ideas? I don't know. I just thought about it and said, I don't know a lot about it. I will one day. Maybe, maybe not. But, I don't want the same person to keep going through, keep running around the same tree and expecting something different to happen, right? So anyway, that's what I'm thinking about with industry. And the last thing I would say is that, if we think about back to data, I just can't talk enough about it, think enough about it, do what we can to analyze it, put it in the right place, make sure it's assured, right? Because, I think, assured data, right, of today, of the fight that's going on today, the competition, the crisis happening today, that's going to happen when the first shot is fired, the assured data today is the steel of World War II, right? That's what made the difference in World War II, right? But how are we doing that from a digital age, from a zeros and ones to making sure they're all in the right place so that we can be effective? Because if they're not, we're not effective, or we got to come up with a better way to do it, all right? Okay, my friends, well, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. If there's any other questions or anything, I'll hold here for a minute. Yes, sir. Hey, Master. All right. Yeah. Getting rid of all your programs at school. So, next question.
Sounds great, sir. So, looking at this, we've had systems like CLC-2S since 2004. We've had great ITV systems. The Air Force is way better at it than us, in my opinion. My question is, sir, are we going to mandate the usage of these systems so the fleet actually gets on board and uses the systems as they should? Yeah,
that's a great question, Master. I don't want to sidestep it. I'm very hesitant to mandate. I know you're not asking me to mandate it. I get it. I know what you're saying. I just want to make sure before we. I think one of the things that I've learned in the audit journey in the Marine Corps, and I've only been on it for 2 years, but one of the things that I've learned in the audit journey is it's not that we're not following policies and procedures that don't exist. It's that we're not following policies and procedures that exist, right? I mean, they already exist. Like how many Marine Corridors do I need to tell me to do something that's in the DOTI or a DON instruction or whatever it is, right? Or that's with accrediting accounting accounting standards, right? I don't really need to do that. So what I'm saying is, my friend, is I'm reticent to mandate that or to have somebody do that because what did we miss, right? What did we miss? right? I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that we consider all the different aspects of that before we say, hey, here's what we're going to do. Did everybody weigh in? Did everybody get a chance to vote and say, yes, this is what I think is important? And then we'll say, okay, well, I think that makes sense. The Air Force is doing. I think the way I think of your question is, if it's good enough for our joint partners, it's probably good enough for us. And prove to me why it's not. That's kind of where I'm on that. Does that make sense? Right? Because if it's not joint and coalition in the future, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We don't need standalone systems, right? We're not doing the same. We're not doing that in the fires realm. We're not doing that. So we can't do it in the logistics realm and something like CLC2S or any kind of ITV, right? If our partners from across the services are doing it, why wouldn't we do that? Now, the challenge is going to be, well, you know, it's going to cost some money and all that kind of stuff. Okay, well, so make some difficult choices. That's what we get paid to do, right? Yeah, thanks for your question. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Hey, sir, thank you so much. Josh Hunt from US Transcom. You kept hitting on data, which right there is at my heart. I'm trying to improve ITV. Now, my question to you is, or to anyone out here, what are the services doing for logisticians to improve their data literacy? Oftentimes, I'm working with the J6, and it's like speaking Hindi and Klingon. We have no idea what's going on. We say we want a cool cop as opposed to focusing on the data, and we really need to be able to talk more eloquently across the enterprise, especially in this audience. Do we have cyber folks? Can we talk to that? Because cyber keeps coming up as an issue. We want to see things, but cyber says no. How can we move through?
Yeah, that's a great question, Josh. I'm not going to, Master Sergeant just so happy he just stood up. I didn't know who's at the schoolhouse, right? I think, Josh, what I'm wrestling with is, you know, as we look at we'll just start at entry level, you know, curriculum. Maybe that's not the place to start, but I'm just starting there. Like, what are we not going to do? And I think in this day and age, post-internet, right, there's some things that we can say maybe we don't need to do or we can do differently, right? Because I'm really wrestling with that. Just, you know, disclosure from my perspective, from my log IT and data section, I don't have any, cyber or even comm, or you see what I'm saying? So it's just a bunch of motivated civilians and Marines who are getting after it because they want to get after it, right? But what I'm trying to figure out, Josh, is, you know, okay, how do I find some of that other expertise, right? I don't need everybody to be a data specialist or data analyst, but I do need more of them. And what we're finding is, you know, how do we change? Because everybody's going to want it, but I want it to do what? Right? Does that make sense? You know, so I think training is a part of it, but also it's, you know, opening the aperture, because I want to make sure I have the right people who can analyze the data, and it's not just a title, but they actually know what they're doing. They're out there, right? And they're going to do great stuff. But I think some of us who are, you know, probably lieutenant colonels and above, right? We don't know the questions to ask, right? So how do we work with you? How do we work with the sixes? How do we inform, you know, with our DC information to come together to work on those things? Jack Long's a great example of that, right? At the Don AI office. Once again, it's a bull of the ocean problem. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think we can make incremental steps that'll have a significant difference, right? Yeah, thanks for that question. That's a very good one. Hey.
General Poole, Dave Moon, 3rd MLG, how's it going? I'd like to know your thoughts in that logistics space about kind of changing gears a little bit about innovation and experimentation in the logistics space, because there seems to be some hesitancy to do that because of maybe sunk cost, or it didn't turn out as I expected, or maybe if this experimentation or innovation goes against current policy. What are your thoughts on that?
So what's an example, Dave? Great to see you again, my friend.
And
I know you don't need to name the guilty here, because we'll start with Forrest.
No.
But I mean,
right. We'll protect the names of this. For instance, experimentation. Let's say in condition-based maintenance, or
something which is
like
a program
that.
of record now.
Yep, it is.
Right. Yeah, I think I don't want to freaking be accused of sidestepping it but I think, Dave, from what I see and working with our friends down in the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, is there is an eagerness to put money towards prototypes and things that may or may not work in the logistics space. I mean, there's a list of 14 different platforms that we're working on that, you know, who knows what the fruition is going to be of them, right? I mean, we have one, a stern landing vessel. A lot of great effort, a lot of great work. We got it out to the West Coast, and they're starting to work on it, and it's having some, you know, some environmental problems with some oil in the water. Hey, that's okay. We'll work through it, right? But I think, Dave, I think one of the things we got to do is, you know, avoid those things like the sunk cost fallacy, right? Sunk cost for a reason. You're supposed to forget about it, right? But somebody's got the scars because they look at it as a loss. I would say that your failure is probably a win. I mean, you know, it's short of, you know, hurting people, right? That's not what we're talking about. But you know, one of the things that, you know, when you get a chance to talk to people who are doing fellowships out in industry, speaking of industry, I ask those Marines who are going out there, I say, do me a favor, when you're talking with your counterparts out of whatever industry it is, ask them about their failures. Ask them about the things that didn't work and what the heck that meant for them, right? Not about their successes, because we can read about that all day long. But what happened? Oh, well, so-and-so got fired, or that landed flat, or here's what we learned from it, right? Because I think too often we just focus on our successes and we don't learn from those things, Dave. And I think from the leadership, from the Commandant on down to McWill, CG and McWill, CD&I, DCI and L, I mean, there's an appetite to experiment and to see what we can do, because we're trying to help ourselves specifically in the surface connector space. Right? We want to come alongside the Navy. It's a naval problem, and we're part of the Navy to figure that out. Right? So I think there's a real appetite for that, and I think we're getting after it. It's pretty exciting.
General, can the Marines or the DoD accept unsolicited proposals from the private sector, like oil and gas industry, mining, that have a collaborative approach to solutions, and be able to offer that?
Yeah, so yes, that's a great question. So, you know, and I can only speak for the Marine Corps, and I've gotten this question before, and I've answered it the same way, right? The way to go into that is to our Systems Command, Marine Corps Systems Command. Contact them. I'll put you in touch with Brigadier General Tamara Campbell, and to start right there, right? Now, I don't know other services, syscoms or whatnot, how they do it, but that's at least a good place to start, because, you know, I think one of the things that I find frustrating is, you know, honest, hardworking Americans who have great ideas, right? But how do they get it to a service if they've never been in the service? Or heck, even if you've been in the service, you might not know how to get it to the service. But, you know, how do they do that with their time, energy, and effort they put into it so that they can, you know, actually hear somebody to see, oh, that's a good idea, or no, we can't do that, or, you know, there's some legal strictures or whatever it is. That's a great question. But Marine Corps Systems Command is where that starts for us. Thanks for that question. All right. Well, in the interest of time, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate it. Thanks for your time. I appreciate all that you do. And if there's anything I can do to help you, please reach out anytime. Thanks a lot.